And I'll switch over to the briefing now. As we go through it, we're going to go through it in sort of the order of a level of need. So we're going to talk about facilities, starting off with adult day centers, moving into independent living, and moving through progressively through facilities that address progressively more demanding assistance with your activities of daily living. At the end, we'll go back and talk just about where to find more information on home health care resources if you choose to try to stay in your home as long as you can. But that's kind of going to be the sequences from the simpler delivery of services to the more complex delivery of services. Okay, so we are recording. You can always feel free to turn off your video or mute yourself when we do go back to open session, and we'll do that about halfway through. While I'm not going to open it up for discussion right now, just make sure to send me an RSVP if you'd like to join us on November 9th at 1:30. There may be weather issues. I will do a double check, and thank you, Suzanne, for the reminder to see if there might be something impacting parking or getting around downtown. But I will definitely be there. I live right around the corner. I would love to meet people at 1:30 near the information kiosk. There's a person that always stands in the Monona Terrace at an information desk on the 4th floor. Depending on what level you enter, in the garage or from the street, you may need to take an elevator to the 4th floor. And I'll have a little Plato sign there. There's also a concession area inside the meeting room. So once we get in there, we'll go over and scope out where the concession tables are. So if anyone needs to rest their feet, they can do so. We'll spend some time there, and then we'll head on over to the post afterwards for refreshment for those who'd like to do so. But it should be fun. Art fair off the square. So here is my email and my telephone number if you have not already contacted me. Obviously, if weather is horrendous, I'll reach everybody by email. I do not have people's telephone numbers, generally speaking, so do check your email, but I have no reason to cancel unless I have a health issue, so fingers crossed on that. So here we go. We've thrown around a lot of terms for senior living, and I know with this audience here, most of you have a very good understanding of the various options available, ranging from apartments where you have pretty much total freedom and are presumed to live independently, to co-op arrangements, what they call active senior communities, which tend to be like senior apartments, but sometimes have a suite of services that are available, such as a transportation van or maybe some pooled maintenance or contractor personnel that you can call upon to put grab bars in your apartments or things like that. But we usually use the broad phrase independent living to address this whole group of housing arrangements here. So when we use that term broadly, that tends to be what we're referring to. Oftentimes, though, people can stay in their homes, particularly if they don't need nursing care or significant help dressing, toileting, or cooking, and they just need some respite, time to socialize with other people. And this is where the adult day center communities become of interest, because oftentimes it gives you that socializing aspect, gets you out of the house, gives you a change of scenery, and lets you engage with others. So it's kind of a scripted environment with planned activities, but over time, hopefully there are people you're, genuinely happy to meet and share experiences with there. It also, of course, provides respite. If you have somebody at home providing care for you, you're going to an adult day center, gives them a little bit of break, a time to both relax or to go out and get shopping done, run errands, or simply take a nap in a lot of cases. We move on from there to assisted living. And assisted living can come with a suite of services on top of that, of course, usually paid for a la carte. You'll be evaluated when you enter an assisted living facility for the level of services you need then. And of course, there are different payment models, whether or not you are entering independent living or assisted living as part of a continuous care community or whether it's more of a pay-as-you-go model. On top of that, some assisted livings also have wings for memory or dementia care, and may be associated under the same umbrella company with nursing and skilled care facilities. Of course, nursing homes are also found completely independent and separate from assisted living, whether they're being used for short-term rehabilitative care or whether or not you need to be in a nursing home for a longer period of time for sustained care. One of the things I'm not going to go into much in this particular class, because it deserves its own class, and we actually covered it some in my fixed income class, is talking about the long-term care policies and how they interact with these institutions. There's incredible variability with this. People who bought policies in the earlier years may have entirely different coverages, limits, and durations than people who bought them in later years. But it's an omission that I intended because it'll kind of derail us, and there's almost no generality from person to person based upon what their policy's like. So, and there are others better able to teach that course than me. This particular session is not going to talk much on hospice or palliative care. That will be in another class. We have touched on it before. It's not going to be a part of this session today. We're going to spend our time on these other ones. Okay, and the reason I did the financial overview first is that if most seniors, if they're going to use a pay-as-you-go model, whether it's for in-home care or for independent or assisted living, they have established how they are going to pay for this constant stream of monies that they're going to have to pay out on a regular basis. And where it really gets more difficult for people is that they find out the housing arrangement requires some sort of large deposit or a buy-in fee or something that's amortized and returned to them over the years. There's many, many different models, but that can cause a surprise for people and sometimes some tax consequences if they have to pull money from a large RMD from an IRA, for example. So that's why we covered the finances first, is this may really shape your decision on which facilities will work for you and which ones won't. Some of these facilities also have life leases. I love the concept of these facilities. The thing I personally, and this is just me, personally have trouble with is that I have always liked to have good insight into the fiscal due diligence, you know, how many liabilities are they carrying? How deep are their pockets? It makes me nervous if somebody already has a long wait list for years and then they're going out and trying to get more people on the wait list. The cynic in me says, well, geez, why are they trying to, you know, fill up these coffers? Are they expanding too quickly? Are they running on too narrow a margin? Are they having so much staff turnover? They're going through a period of financial distress while they're trying to get new people in, and, you know, are they trying to polish up the facilities and add new brocaded wallpapers and fancy moldings that really don't have any impact on healthcare delivery whatsoever? I just, whenever I turn over a big chunk of money, I like to make sure I really understand the organization, and the opaqueness of these businesses running this is a source of concern to me. I just sometimes don't feel comfortable. So that's something we can talk about if the rest of you or any of you have done some due diligence in this regard and have reached a comfortable decision and want to share how you have come to that conclusion. Your long-term care policy may, in some circumstances, pay some portion of your in-unit care, transportation, or ancillary services that you receive. Veterans benefits may be available to some of you, and that includes to the spouses. You need to check into that. Sometimes it's not for in-facility care, but it may be for home health care in the home. Community programs exist but are scarce. I'm not going to go into those today. And some seniors, as we talked about again in our previous financial class, may use a reverse mortgage or some other form of lien to access equity in their home in order to pay some of these upfront costs if they have them. I also want to touch on Medicaid waivers. I've given a link here for those of you which may be able to get services delivered in your home through that means. So let's start with the most general situation I've encountered here in the Plato groups and in my own group of women over 50, most of them retired, which is you're looking around, just making sure you've got your ducks in a row if you need to go into independent living with a progression to assisted living. And you're looking. Okay. Most of us who have or have retained their computer skills are so used to going to the computer for this, it only works somewhat. So if you want to go shopping and find out where to buy cookware, it's a piece of cake. You'll be able to find and drill down even through Google Maps as to where you can find that particular, espresso machine you're looking for. It doesn't work so well for this. So I just wanted to point this out because we're used to using online resources very well, and you can get somewhere with this, but you can't get a lot. And I'm going to show you the distinction between the casual search and the deep drill down today. So I will tell you, having owned a couple of businesses and having them listed in Google for business services, is you have to list yourself under something. As a business, you have to give yourself a label. So it's helpful for you to know what those labels are when you are searching. And the label you want to use for independent living is retirement community, as opposed to independent living. Just in general, you'll find that when you go to a map and put that in, it'll bring more things up. And that's because that's how businesses tag themselves. It's not because of AI or smartness or search words. The businesses consciously tag what they are. Okay. The second one you can use is assisted living facility if you're searching for specifically assisted living facilities. But retirement communities will get you first. And then they have subcategories called memory care facilities, nursing home, or senior living center. So just on the west side of Madison, I ran an experiment and, put these phrases in, and you will find the large facilities who, of course, have a social media manager or an IT person that handles the computers. You will find them. They will show up very quickly. It's the smaller ones, the ones particularly under 20 units, who often won't show at all. They may show up maybe as a point on an address, but there'll be nothing else. If anything, they won't have even tagged themselves with any of these tags. So it's not a particularly good tool, but it's good for one thing. If you're really starting your search, it is very helpful to kind of drill down to a portion of a map. And the reason I say get your map small enough is if you opened it up to all of Madison right now, only some of them will show up. There's obviously some weird algorithm going on where you have to drill into a certain detail on the map to have everything show. But if you do that, you'll at least find where things are congregating. And most of you probably know this, and it's probably due to the price of land and zoning issues, but a lot of these facilities will always congregate around any major highway system. And in fact, a lot of them will be very close to major thoroughfares. So if you go looking for a place, this is actually something you need to think about. It's also true if you go to buy a condominium in a 55+ community, a lot of them are being built near highways. You really want to make sure you know which direction your room is facing if you're near a railroad track or if you're getting spillover highway noise. The other thing is if you're going to be living here for a while, I can't overemphasize, that's why I pointed out the air quality monitors last time, is it really makes a difference if you are within 1/8 of a quarter mile versus 3/4 of a mile away. There is a significant difference in air quality. So if you have COPD or an asthma qualities or a family predisposition to pulmonary diseases, these are things you really need to watch out for. And so the maps are good for showing you where services converge. So yeah, play around, use retirement communities, look at your healthcare facilities, and you'll begin to see how these overlays stack up. If there's favorite places you like to shop, if you need to be near a bus stop, if you have a preferred grocery store chain, instead of making your problem almost insurmountable, use the maps to kind of overlay and drill down to your geographical regions, because this will prevent problems of dissatisfaction later. You will have consciously taken certain areas off the table. And that's a good thing, because if you don't think about it up front, you may go do that visit, become enamored of the facility, and not properly weigh these quality of life issues when you go to put your money down and pay that first month's premium. I will let you know I looked up on assisted living. very few differences in the map. The map used largely the same. So clearly businesses are using the word retirement community as a way to tag themselves appropriately in here. But just understand your mid-size and smaller ones may very well not show up with these little red markers. All right. So that's the message. Drill down geographically. Do not spend time getting enamored on things that do not provide you with the quality of life and access to other services you need. So before we even get to assisted living and independent living, I want to talk about 55 plus apartments, because there are senior apartment units. Oftentimes they are not marketed. You might not even know it, or there might be an inclination where the landlord would be very happy to have a suite of tenants who are older rather than younger. Okay, so this concept of senior apartments is a broad phrase. It's not a phrase used with a rigid definition. But I did find that our Dane County Aging and Disability Resource Center, located right here at this website, has an interesting spreadsheet that they keep. So if you click resources right here, and then underneath that, I've extracted a portion of the screen. You'll see the word housing, and it'll have a plus sign by it. And when you click that plus sign, it will expand the choices for you to look at. So you will not see this unless you go to the phrase housing and click the plus sign. Now, we can say that that's a user interface website thing that people might know if they use the computer a lot. But if you don't use the computer a lot, you may not know that. You have to expand this display, and all of this will pop up. So I'm going to jump down here to senior housing. And that's really helpful because somebody at this in Dane County is doing the homework of calling these apartment buildings and finding out if they are receiving either senior subsidies or have marketed themselves as 55 plus or have any extra services for active 55 plus. This is a really helpful thing. And I've had a number of friends who have decided to downsize and move into an apartment, but they really don't want to commit to an independent living facility yet, unless they really feel they need to and get in early because there's long wait lists. So if you're able to, if that's not weighing on you too heavily, this is another way to look and see what's out there. The other really good thing is if you open up this document, I've just extracted little portions of what's in it so you can see what's there. So, for example, in Madison on the west side, the All Saints Neighborhood Main Street apartment, let me zoom in. Has 27 one-bedroom units, 21 two-bedroom units, is marketed specifically to people over 55 and charges market rate. Whereas this one is Section 42 housing with some subsidized apartments. But there's a whole bunch in here. And these are people you would not find at all just perusing Google Maps or going to, any sort of social media site and looking for housing. You would only probably find this through word of mouth. The thing is by having this resource here through Dane County, there's never been enough senior housing. There always seems to be too little of it. So I'm sure these people keep their apartments full. Now, whether or not this meets the standard of living that you want, whether or not it has good accessibility, whether or not they keep their sidewalks well plowed, whether or not you have to climb 3 steps or 10 steps to get into a second floor flat is another matter entirely. So they're not meeting any code here. There's no building, they're meeting building codes, but there's not any specific senior requirements that they're meeting here. They're just asserting that they are 55 plus and independent living. So again, it'll go on and on. There was more here than I thought. It was the most compact and efficient way for you to get a lot of this information. And I thought it was also really great too, because it'll talk about whether or not they allow pets. There's also another type of senior housing option, which has got nothing to do with being senior. It's got to do with having a tax subsidy for income restricted. But this is a real use to seniors, particularly if you are living on fixed income pretty close to the line. So if you're living pretty frugally, perhaps only on your Social Security and no significant other savings, there are subsidized housing, and I'm not talking about Section 42. My understanding is that these apartment buildings, and this is one that I live in right here, right across from the Hilton in Monona Terrace is the Novo Apartments, and a portion, 10%, I believe it is, of our apartments are income restricted. And so their rents are about about 1/2 to 2/3, somewhere in that range of what market rate rents are. So if you happen to fall into this income category, you can make an application with the apartment building. You don't have to file with the state. You don't have to file with the county. This is between you and the apartment building. Some of these apartment buildings are getting this as part of workforce credit. Some of them are getting that as part of an arrangement they made with the city in order to use the land for this purpose. But you will find, like here's the Madison Mark, you'll find a lot of quite nice apartment buildings in this list. So if you're living off Social Security or small pension or teacher's pension, this may be an option for you you didn't know about. They tend not to do this for the 2 bedrooms. I'll tell you that. Almost everything is either a studio or 1-bedroom apartment. But it's a really good deal if the lifestyle works for you. It can really help. Okay. You know, it's funny. I went and tried to get the costs for independent living and assisted living. And I will tell you that aside from the data at Genworth Financial, who runs the Care Scout site, the numbers are still all over the map. So either things are in flux, or people are not updating their numbers, or people are only doing partial sampling sizes, which is probably what's going on here. But the number I was able to get, which I considered one of the larger numbers, but it just in my gut feels like it's probably right based on what I've seen, is that the median rent for independent living, and it still seems low, $2,780 a month. Okay. I'd take that with a grain of salt. I mean, because I've seen plenty of independent living numbers that are higher than that. I will say that this number is more useful, which is if you look and put a cost index on Madison relative to other areas, you're going to pay 10 to 15% more in this part of the state than you will in other parts of the state. So it may be that in your go-go most active years, you really stay in Madison, and maybe you keep an eye out on some of these ring suburbs and move to if you need to push your costs down later on, because there's definitely a cost premium for being here. Now for assisted living, of course, the costs jump up. We've got right now in 2024 dollars, so maybe you should add another 5%, $6,123 for a 1-bedroom assisted living. The rule of thumb is to add about 30% to that number if the facility also supports memory care and makes an arrangement with you either to go into memory care or to have access to it. And of course, nursing homes are very, very expensive. Okay, so I covered that. So let's define activities of daily living, because if you go into anything beyond independent living, you will likely be assessed. You will be looked at and observed to determine how you can fit into the community and whether or not you might need some extra services if they provide such things in regards to washing yourselves, toileting, mobility, transferring from wheelchair to bed to toilet to shower, your ability to dress and feed yourself. I have not personally gone through with someone I've loved for that detailed assessment, but have certainly seen the price sheets for this and how the arrangements work in various facilities to provide these add-on services. Seems to behave largely the same from facility to facility I've either visited or been an ombudsman at, or have known people that have been there. So I'm sure everybody knows this, but an assisted living facility is not a nursing home. There are no 24-hour access to nursing services. Definitely you need to be a somewhat more active senior to be able to live in assisted living. But if you have a higher level of care that requires full-time monitoring and medical assistance, then a nursing home would be the facility you need, with 24-hour medical care for your meals, increased safety features, and less of an apartment style living and more of a private or shared room type of lifestyle. So let's go to Wisconsin's terminology for these facilities, because they're a little bit different than what I've seen in both Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina, and Florida. I don't think it's a Midwest thing, but maybe it is. These are the abbreviations that you will see when you go to Dane County and pull the information we're going to go into in more detail. So adult day centers, adult day care, ADC. I just did an update looking at the rates per day. Now the definition of a day may differ between various facilities. It may not mean morning to end of day, so you have to check into that when you go and visit. But it's generally somewhere between $85 and $140 per day. So this is where you take someone who may need some help with activities of daily living, but they can go out and be engaged with other people. You take them out of the home, and then you pick them up. Residential care apartment complexes are generally independent living with supportive senior services. And I know that sounds ambiguous, and I was trying to drill down for a better definition for that. And probably someone at the Department of Aging could do a better job than me in this, but I really couldn't find a tight definition for this. So you'll normally see when you look these things up, something will either be called a day center or it'll be called a community-based residential facility. This is what the assisted living and nursing home facilities fall under, is this label, CBRF. So if you see that in the charts, they have a place with 24-hour supervision. The level, again, of supervision will vary depending on the care needs that they serve, but adults reside may need up to 3 hours of intermediate nursing care each week. So obviously now we've gotten into the assisted living realm. But I don't want to, and I think so, I'm going to show something later that may surprise you about the adult family homes. I have seen a definition that says they take up to 6 different adults, but when I actually opened the PDF files of the homes that were in Madison, I didn't see any taking more than 4 adults. So I would use 4 as your metric, up to 4 adults in a home, up to 7 hours of nursing care per week. So again, the person doesn't need a lot of nursing care, but they are supposed to be able to have access to it up to that amount. And it's something we don't talk about enough, and I haven't quite figured out why. At first, my thought was somewhat cynical, which is, well, these are not well run. Maybe they're Medicaid-only facilities, and that's not at all true. Some take Medicaid, some are private pay only. Those are the models. The models vary, but we'll go into that a little bit more. It's just we hardly ever see it discussed, but yet there's so many of them that clearly they are used for placement when people come out of hospitals or have a sudden need for care that they didn't have before. So if anybody knows about adult family homes or has had experience with it, please pop up here during the break. I'd love to hear your story. So again, in keeping with our plan to start with the services that are for people with less care needs and moving to higher care needs, we'll start with the adult day center. So going back to that same website, clicking the resources, if you drill down in this case under caregiving and support groups, there's those pluses and minuses I was telling you. You click the plus till it turns to a minus, and you can find the adult day centers and the memory cafes in the community. Now, I'm going to go into adult day centers, but let me just touch on the memory cafes. It's not just for Alzheimer's. It's really for the memory cafes are great for any of the types of dementias or cognitive declines and aphasias that might be encountered. They've kept the name memory cafe that came up about a couple decades ago, but they serve a broader community. And so when you go to the adult day centers at Dane County, when you click what they've got to open, it'll open with a really nice brochure that's just an extract of the cover. But they had at the end a really good set of questions to check if you or someone you love is going to an adult day center, which is validate how long it's been around, the staff to participant ratio, and whether or not the day center has a nurse on call, someone they could call. There's not going to be a nurse present in that environment, but they are supposed to have a way to deal with health emergencies in that environment very rapidly. Talk to them about it. Play some what-if scenarios, particularly if you have a loved one with a problem that you're concerned that might have a rapid onset. What engaging activities are offered? Are they playing games? Is there a pool table? Do they do a lot of cards? Do they do, watercoloring, block building? There's all sorts of things that they do that are intended not only to be fun, but to be engaging, whether or not it's to improve one's tactile skills and using your hands, light memory training, things intended to spur your brain. See what types of activities they have and whether or not they offer these extra services. There are actually some of them that have a podiatry care on site, for example, which would be great. And some of them even have showers in the area so they can help bathe you or your loved one when you go to visit if you need some extra help. And it's not only if you need extra help. Sometimes if you have a loved one who's in cognitive decline, you may have a great deal of trouble enticing them to bathe at home. They can become very resistant. Whereas if they're in an environment like this with someone else, sometimes the care aides who are there at the day center have a real different way of being able to get people into the shower. It's a real skill, not to be underestimated. Again, ask if you need it. If the person you are bringing has dementia or aphasia, the ability to compromised communication skills, whether or not they can dispense medicines, what meals they provide, and how they let you know if you or the person you love is not working out. How does that work? I mean, talk about that up front so that you know what you would need to do next and what time frame you might need to have if an adult day center isn't working anymore. So there's a link to one of the packages. And I will say another good thing Dane County does is every time they update the package, the name of the file doesn't change. Thank God for that. It means the links will keep working. You just have to look at the dates on these things. They tend to update some of them quarterly, some of them every half year, it seems. I've been looking at this now for a few years, and it seems that's about the time frame. And I know it's a lot of work. So we're going to take a break here before we move on to assisted living and nursing care. All right, so let me stop sharing. Come back to the group. And would anyone like to raise anything so far about what we've been discussing? Yes, go ahead, Suzanne.
I'm not very handy. Can you hear me? I'm not very handy here with my. It's actually not what we were just discussing, but going back to your event on Sunday, I just looked the calendar up for the marathon. Starts at 7 in the morning, completion at 1. It's on the square, Mifflin and Wisconsin Avenue, but it should be all done. I just looked at your email with your timeline. You're good to go. The universe is looking out for you, and that is it.
Good. Well, I don't start anything at the crack of dawn like a marathon. I don't operate at that time too well, so I'm glad to hear it, and I'm glad it's also over towards Mifflin as opposed to on this side of the square. Go ahead, Becky.
Yeah, my sister and I recently toured the All Saints neighborhood. And a couple things that I thought were helpful to know. It is sponsored by Catholic Charities, but you don't have to be Catholic. It seemed very nice. They do not charge any deposit to be on the wait list. So getting on the wait list is sort of a no cost thing if it's an option you would want to keep open. I was impressed. I thought the apartments were really very nice.
That's great. Did you have to make an appointment well in advance, or were you able to call a few days before? How did that work out for you?
I think it took a week, maybe. We didn't need a long time in advance to get in. And they gave us, it's a substantial tour. The buildings are really large. The senior apartments are a little less expensive. They don't include the washer dryer, the underground parking. They can be added on. The Main Street apartments do include pretty much everything. And they're a little bit nicer, but it is a rather huge complex. It's right next door to Aldi's and Brennan's, which is kind of nice, I thought.
And I will say Catholic Charities, not in the same area, runs an adult day center as well. So they've been doing that for a while. Okay, Charlene, go ahead.
Thank you for mentioning the adult family homes, because they are really hard to find. even being in healthcare for decades, it's so hard to figure out which ones, but they offer a lot more sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down. The reason they are of interest to me is I used to work as an ombudsman in a rural area. So pretty much everything was a family home. It was the only thing I knew about. I mean, when I came here to Madison and I start going into these places with 90 to 100 people, in fact, it's overwhelming to me just to assess the nature of the care, because I've kind of lost some of that intimacy you have in an adult family home. But the downside of an adult family home is it really depends on the quality of that family. If there's one or two people providing the majority of the care and they get sick or they leave, or it happens to be an older adult child in the family and they're gone, the whole nature of your experience could change. I will tell you, when I was in a rural environment and these were common, I loved some of these homes. Some of these homes, honestly, it would be where I would go. Absolutely, because it was like family. And even though it was only 3 to 4 people, if you had, Jenny, I will use the word loving, and I don't use that word lightly, but this was a labor of love for some of these families. I'm sure it was helping their bottom line and helping them keep this large ranch style house that maybe had been in the family for a long time and they had converted it to this type of care. But it was very meaningful to me to see people who would regularly go out and join together and watch the birds on the back porch with the bird feeder in the morning. To have, it was like living in an extended family. They would share breakfast at the same breakfast table. There was a warmth that could come from that environment. There are, of course, also horror stories. There are horror stories about them being poorly run, or maybe the medical care is okay, but the person's room is viewed as their own room. I know as an ombudsman, I went to some of them, and I mean, the house might have been kept fine, but their personal room might have been in such disorder that would have never been allowed in a larger institutional facility. But you can say, you know what, maybe she's just granting them autonomy, and the resident is saying, I don't want you to come into my room. I just found a different vibe. Those of you who work in this field maybe have far more insights than I do. So I'm looking at as an ombudsman from the perspective, was the resident happy being there or not? Aside from my perspectives of level of hygiene, order, or disorder, a lot of people are really happy being there and they didn't want to go anywhere else. So this is on my to-do list, to go visit some of these family homes, because you're going to be really surprised in the next part of the briefing. There are 174 of them in Madison alone. Okay. So my question I have to ask myself, if there's 174 of these and they're listed in active status, what must be happening is these places must be providing a bridge for people who are getting suddenly discharged from hospital and need a place to go to. I don't see what else it could be, or this is going on and they are getting a lot of Medicaid recipients and there's a process for people getting in it that I don't know about. To me, it is pure speculation. I really wish I had an answer for you guys, but at least maybe I'm planting some questions in your head as to what are these places? Why are there so many? Why do they seem to be filled? And yet we never hear about them. And as an ombudsman, there's nobody assigned as an ombudsman to this because they're too small. So this was different than when I was in rural areas of Maryland. But nonetheless, based on their size, they're regulated either by Dane County or by the state. So, I guess my commitment to you will be, I hope to be much smarter about this another year from now. And I do plan to arrange visits with them, if nothing else, to satisfy my understanding of this. So Kathy, go ahead. I see your hand up.
Sure. So a few years ago, I was working on getting my mom to move here from Michigan. And so we went through this process, and I set up a number of places for her to go visit and to tour, including independent apartments and senior apartments. And she ended up picking Middleton Glen in Middleton, and that is a life lease. Plus you pay a monthly fee. And they're sort of affiliated with Capital Lakes. Although, so if you needed a continuum of care, although Capital Lakes is really expensive. So the nice thing was that it was actually pretty affordable to get a place there. And it just so happened to be kind of serendipity that she was able to get an apartment that she really liked there. And it's nice because, you know, she knew my husband and I here, but didn't have, you know, a lot of friends or anything here. So it's been a really good opportunity for her after being by herself in her home during COVID.
Yeah.
And so it's nice because they have a lot of different activities, but it was really looking at a lot of the resources that you've talked about. So ADRC and what kind of questions to ask and what to look for. We were able to look at financial information. I know you said that was one of the things that you were concerned about in signing up with a life lease, but and I forget, there was like a resource, I forget if it was with DFI or DHS or whatever, where you could go and you could look at their financial information. They are a nonprofit organization. So it was really kind of quite a process, but really finding something that met the needs of them. And I think you were really right about looking at where the apartment is in relation to everything else, because she looked at one other place and the selection of apartments, it really varied whether you were going to be in a quiet place or a noisy place. And, you know, where she's at, she can walk to UW Credit Union. There's a grocery store right there, great walking in the neighborhood. There's a bus, you know, if she wanted to take the bus. They also have transportation services, or I'm the primary transportation giver, but and it's close to us, like 5 minutes away. So that's really nice.
Well,
But
can
go
I
ahead.
ask you a question, Kathy?
Sure, absolutely.
When you were going through this, search, and you got to the point of close to picking this place, did you feel pretty certain this was the right place? In other words, was it pretty easy to take the other off the table, or did you feel like you were maybe making a few shots in the dark, and did you have some qualms about it? Was your mother uncertain? Or did it feel right? How did you converge on that decision?
Okay. So, you know, we did our tour, and of course our tour was broader. You know, I wanted to expand, you know, what she could look at to see what she liked.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there were pros and cons to each place, and independently from each other, I think we both ended up with the same conclusion about the location and kind of the feel of the community. I think was really important to my mom. She also liked that it was a nonprofit organization. That was something that was kind of more important to her versus another place that she looked at. But it was really kind of the feel of the community and what services they had, plus what was available for her to walk to, because once she moved here, she didn't have a car. So having that independence, I mean, they do offer rides there, so you can get a ride. But it was much more, I think, important, the actual apartment that was available. And we lucked out because it was like a perfect apartment for her. It just happened to be available. So she wasn't on a wait list. And from the time we looked at apartments in October, she moved in December, which was like,
so lucky. I mean,
okay.
That's extremely unusual.
And we both survived.
But I'm glad you used the word feel. And that's why I asked that question, because I know I come across as rather analytical and drill down and narrow down. And that's all true. But ultimately, when you go and visit these places, there will be a real gut punch.
Right.
Almost
it's kind of like when your kid goes to college, you know, and they narrow it down to the one that they feel is the best fit for themselves.
Well, it's like when you had a torn hip and I actually went into assisted living. I mean, I don't know when I was going to get off this wheelchair, and I was so demoralized by it. One of the strongest things was the fact the one I picked had a park out in the back. It was next to a city park that was well maintained with a paved, well maintained walking loop. I think that's the only thing that, you know, helped me keep my sanity there for a while. I wasn't so much worried about the social activities. I was really worried about my own ability to function and get out in the world. And so somewhat traumatized by that it was the place. Yeah.
Yes. And I think it's really important because, you know, one of my arguments to my mom was, you know, don't be like your mom who ended up where she didn't want to be. And so try and find something that you really like. And she just didn't want to make a commitment until she knew what place she was going to end up at.
Yeah.
And so that was the process. And frankly, I thought it might take a couple trips here to find something, but she found 3 things that she liked. But one was an independent apartment, and I had some issues with that because it would be a lot harder for her to make friends and to do all of that. And then the other one.
Let me step back to that one
Sure.
other point you made.
Okay.
Which was talking about your mom and inability to make a decision. And I didn't mutter, but I was pretty unforgiving of my mother, who was in a really sour mood and couldn't seem to make any decisions. And I now, in hindsight, realize that that was part of her cognitive decline. It's part of losing executive decision making. I was like, I thought she was being bitter and resentful or angry at me or anything else. If someone you love that you have to place is going through this, there's nothing good enough, can't make a decision and whatnot, there are both short-term and long-term problems that can literally impede decision making so badly. At some point, you just have to make your way through it. In other words, you may never reach that feel-good decision that, Kathy, you were fortunate enough to be able to make.
Well, and I think part of that is doing it earlier rather than later.
Yeah.
So doing it while she's still doing pretty well and can make friendships at her new location. I think that was critical, and her mom waited too long. And it was really sad. My grandma was always like a very social person, and that was just really hard.
Yeah. I thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Let's see. Okay. Yes, go ahead, Suzanne.
I had 2 comments in this discussion, and on the one that we we're just talking about. If people haven't been social, then I'm thinking of my sister here who's haven't. And I just got off the phone with her before our group meeting. It's had because she's an introvert. She's never been that outgoing to begin with. So when you have that at this point, she's 75. What if part of that is cognitive, a cognitive issue, and what is it just inbred in your personality? And I've tried to get her to join everything. I mean, I told her even about your Sunday excursion, about training to take the bus. She's giving up her license. She doesn't want to drive. It's just too much for her. And I thought, oh my God. But it's all of this, take care of me, I'm helpless. She's going, and this is a woman who's, never been helpless. She had her own company, but she's an introvert, but you would never exceed her boundaries. And this is just totally new for me.
Well, it was new for me if I watched my mother, who she may not have been in the workforce for a lot of her life, but she was very active and a champion bridge player. So I knew she really had her wits about her. Was involved in, singing groups and other things, and it just closed down. And I really thought that I almost thought, and I hate to say this because it sounds terrible, I almost thought it was a faked helplessness. I may not.
Yes.
It felt like a faked helplessness, was not the person but as she continued to degrade, what I realized was that for a lot of people, this inability to make decisions is the first sign of what may be a very slow moving cognitive decline. It's just not something that they can do while they are just in emotional distress, getting to the point of trying to make a decision. In fact, reaching that decision at some point may become impossible. And I know I've shared the story where my mother could not make a decision. The neighbors were calling me. Saying she needed to go because she was having emotional, breakdowns in the shared courtyards and things. And I had to make her 2 packages. And I said, to some point when you are in such distress, drop one of these in the mail, because she still had to own her decision. I was not at the point where I was going to physically try to get my mother carried out of the house. Okay. I knew at some point she would break. That's horrible, but it's still in my mind, and perhaps it's my ombudsman training. I put autonomy so high on the list. That's one of the last rights you have left as you age, and it's, to me, sacred, to the point where, yes, even if she is in severe emotional distress that probably could have been well avoided, I still believe she had that right to suffer in that state of emotional distress till she made that decision to move. I would not say that on a physical condition that's causing ongoing pain, but You know, autonomy as the right to autonomy and to make one's decision has been beaten into me so much through my recurrent training that maybe I sometimes wonder if I placed it too high, because God knows she and the neighbors went through hell and back till she finally decided she had to move. Of course, it was late. She didn't like the place she went. There was never a moment's happiness about it, but she did go. I guess that would be my solution is just, you know, at some point in time, she will probably feel she must go. Yeah, I think. Or,
you know, the other thing I want to bring up is she's at Vista West. No, she's been there for a couple of years. And we just, in our group, Financial Matters and Retirement, we just got some information from Vista West, their schedule, all of the social things there, all of the meetings they have, everything. I would never have understood they even had any of that information available, according to my sister, who said they don't communicate anything. And I said, well, I have here right in front of me your calendar, your X, Y, Z. And she goes, well, how did you get that? And I said, I am happy to print a copy and give this to you. And if you've got questions, tell me. I'm going to call Jackie. You can't call Jackie. I said, I think a lot of people call Jackie because she's the manager.
I think you've hit on it. Have a good family member or a friend. I kind of made a vow with a friend this weekend. We were talking about things, and she doesn't live here now, but plans to move here. And you know, each one of us has to keep an eye out for there, because you're exactly right. I'm sure your sister felt with all her heart that the information was not conveyed, and yet you had it. And you know what? If you don't have someone else looking for you, that's the situation you're going to be in. That's going to be your reality. And
I will say something else. Earlier in the conversation, you were speaking about group homes, you know, 5 to 7 people in a group home situation. And I will draw this. I used to work at the university. Okay. So, at one time I was responsible for an employee who had schizophrenia. Now, she was an employee. She had an office. She had, her own way of setting up her office. It didn't meet the standards of necessarily anybody around her. She pulled dark shades on her windows. Her caseworker came. We worked, you know, but she was hired. She had a disability, and you know, that's not common information. That was information for me to know because I was her manager.
mm-hmm.
But that's not information you share. It's private, you know, by law. So if you are, and she had personality outbursts, I will say you really had to understand the situation, but she was allowed to be employed. She was allowed to have that room. So if you are moving into a group home, and I just throw this out there, and you were mentioning rooms that were not necessarily organized, etc., that person could have an emotional, a mental disability that you would not know about nor be informed about, but they could end up being.
Yeah, I've definitely encountered with, and then I want to go on to Kathleen. You did have your hand raised. You put it down, but I'll come back to you if you want to ask. Hang on, and then it'll be Barb, and then we'll return to the discussion. But yeah, with group homes in particular, that's one of the things. For example, if you have a friend who has maybe a well-managed mental health disorder, or is in cognitive decline, talk about it in advance, because there's some pretty well known. For example, if somebody has to start introducing an antipsychotic drug, even if it's off label, like Seroquel for agitation, for example, that'll be an event that will make you not be able to stay at that facility. And so it can be pretty brutal, and it can happen very abruptly. I mean, I'm on forums, several caregiver forums for dementia, and people are given very short notice. If somebody acts out, strikes an aide, you'll be out of there real fast. It'll be head spinning. Now, this is where I'll go back. You work with your ombudsman office. If you ever encounter this, where you're being forced out of a facility, there are certain processes that have to be followed, even if it's a small group home. And this is where you need to reach out for some expert guidance. They will make sure your loved one isn't thrown out on the street, or that there's a bridging strategy. It may not be a bridging strategy you want, but it'll be a bridging strategy.
Right.
So yeah, that's a tough one with mental health disorders. Kathleen, did you have a question?
Well, it's really not a question, but everybody's cutting in and out in their dialogue. And I don't know whether you notice it or if it's just my computer, which is plugged in, but it's losing battery power.
I think it's your computer. Is that, I haven't seen that happening.
Okay, nobody else has noticed it.
No. Okay, Barb, go ahead.
Okay, I was just wondering, going back to Middleton Glen, I looked it up and I just see independent apartments. Is that the only option they have?
I thought you said it was a lice leaf, Kathy. Does it have the option to move up to a higher level of care?
That's what I was trying to say. They have like an affiliation with Capital Lakes.
Ah,
So, but
Okay.
at Middleton Glen, it's only senior apartments. But I will tell you that there's people who live there that are over 100. There's people in walkers and wheelchairs, and some people have people that come in to help them. So I think they have to be up, like have a certain ability. But they seem like they accommodate a lot of different people. But there is that affiliation with Capital Lakes.
you also, if you need a type of care that they may not be able to provide, for example, regular injections, that's something that you could choose. You might have somebody come in and give that to you as part of a palliative care team, for example. You are allowed to add on
Yes.
those palliative care and hospice services, even if you stay in independent living. That is your home, and you are allowed to have access to those services. So that's an interesting point. All right, Anne, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to it's a footnote. I'm not sure whether this is anything to be concerned about, but I'm on the waiting list for Capital Lakes. And the staff told us that when they're going to tear down a building and add more independent units. And so they'll have reduced space for the more advanced care. And they said that only people at Capital Lakes will be admitted. They aren't going to take outsiders. So it would just be prudent to check and make sure for Middleton Glen that arrangement is still going to be in force when this change happens.
Thank you, Anne, for mentioning it. I heard exactly the same thing when I went to their open house a couple of weeks ago.
Mhm.
It's what they're doing is they're definitely stopping the jump the queue issue. They want you to enter at the front early on in independent living, and they will reward you for that commitment to living there longer. That's how I interpret it.
Right.
But yes, you're right. There is actually reduced number of units in the newer facility.
Right.
I will just say, in comparing places, they are so much more expensive than everyone else. But I will say, because I know people who live there and they love it.
Mm-hmm.
So, it is what it is. I'm hoping my mom gets to stay where she is, and that by moving there sooner rather than later, that she won't have some of the problems she may have had she stayed at home.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm almost certain, if only from the socialization itself. Kathy, I take it they provide meals and have a place to eat there as well, right?
Correct. Meals are optional. And you just pay for what you use.
Yeah.
Now, it is meals just during the week, not on the weekends. But if she ever needed that, we're like 5 minutes away. So, for her, it's not an issue. But they have their chefs pretty good. I've eaten meals over there. Yeah.
So Anne has raised a good point. If their commitment to you is that there was a feeder into Capital Lakes higher skilled nursing facilities, you need to just double check with them based on the fact that Capital Lakes business model is changing. So that would be a worthy thing for you to go and check out without creating any undue alarm.
Well, my guess is that my mom would never want to go there anyway, probably due to the cost and it being downtown. So anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was thinking that if you said there was a relationship, there might be a discount or a break. So, but I won't. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, it's definitely something to look
Yes.
into if it's something you were counting on. So let's return to the briefing. There we go. Okay. I have left this in. This is 2024 costs. I first made these charts at the beginning of 2025. I actually went back there. I haven't seen the numbers change. So obviously they're still compiling 2025 data. But Genworth, who runs this, is a company that sells annuities. And the reason I like using this particular site is I believe that since they're selling annuities, that they have more insight into the ongoing costs of living and exposure to a vast pool of customers. So they have talked with lots and lots of people about what it costs to live. So again, going back to these numbers I gave previously and the number I gave for private room, it's really kind of shocking to me. There's not much difference between a private room and a semi-private room price in a nursing home. I would have thought there was a bigger cost spread. Okay, so where to start your search? So we talked about Dane County. So Dane County does address assisted living and nursing homes as well, but I want to go to the Wisconsin state level of resources at this point. And so you go to dhs.wisconsin.gov and you can go to the Consumer Guide for Healthcare, and it gives you an overview of what's out there in the state. It gives you an exposure to the terminology that's used to describe these facilities. It has two really helpful things. One is the assisted living facility profiles, and the other one is provider search. And I have to say, compared to other states may have this, but at least Wisconsin made it relatively easy to find. Okay, it's still buried down there, but it still exists, and you have access to detailed information that you might have thought that only government enforcement agencies had, through Medicare or through the state Department of Health and Human Services. So I've just pointed out with little arrows some of the ones that have been particularly helpful for me. I think it's really nice they compile these directories and update them every so often so that you're not missing out. You're not sitting there spending time on Nextdoor, Google Maps, or driving around and wondering if your information is incomplete. Okay. So if we go to the provider search first, there's a lot of things you can drill down and pick. So for example, I might want to know about adult family homes only in Dane County that also serve people with dementia. So I have a very specific query. Okay. And when I did that search, 76 family homes appeared within 5 miles of Madison.
Wow.
Okay. That say they will take these patients. Again, gives us no insight on quality whatsoever at this point. This is just pure numbers game. All right. But still, it's kind of amazing. So I drilled down into the search. I opened up the search list, and this is just a little teeny snippet of what you can see, but I just picked one, Gracious Angelic Care, a family home on Keswick Street, that supports the developmentally disabled, Alzheimer's patients, people who are emotionally disturbed, mental illness, traumatic brain injury. So you can see there they have proclaimed themselves able to handle these disorders. And to you and me, it looks like a house on the street. And I cannot overemphasize this. You will not be able to detect that these are facilities caring for people looking at it from the street. Not at all. So again, I did this at the beginning of the year, so it may look different if you did it today, but if you went, you could actually then drill down into this, but you can go down and you can get the latest in inspection and enforcement reports on even the tiniest of facilities. It is all there. So you can see, for example, at the end of 2023, there was no statement of deficiencies noted. Prior to that, in July of 2023, they had an enforcement action that was needed to get some recurrent training done. They need to do 15 hours of recurrent training within 6 months. It was post due, but it has since been corrected. They had some other things about background checks and medical orders and whatnot. Now, I recognize that these are sort of what we would call bureaucratic bureaucratic or paperwork related offenses, but everything is in there. You know, if there's a history of open wounds, infectious diseases not being properly controlled, you can drill down and you can look into this for each of the facilities. So my feeling is, this is where I go first. I wouldn't even bother visiting a place that had languishing enforcement actions open on them. Why would I? I mean, I wouldn't want myself or my loved one in an environment where they're not being corrected. You notice that does nothing to say how warm and compassionate the care is. This is still a terribly clinical assessment, but we might as well take the worst of the lot off the table, is the way I look at it. So now we can repeat the search, going back to that same display I showed you before. Now let's look at assisted living community-based residential facilities. I left my other criteria intact. I said, give me the ones that handle dementia patients. Again, got 26 names out of that, which you'll notice is even more than we showed on our Google Maps, going to show you that social media tools are really not the way you need to do this drill down. It's only at per cursory first pass. And here's where you will see, you know, here's Capitol Lakes, Covenant Oaks, Oakwood Knoll. Here's where you'll see a better indication of where they are, the size of the facility. And I have to say, the spreadsheet here goes much more to the right. There's a lot here that's obviously not being shown because I can't fit it on the screen. So again, just as with the small facility homes, you can go and look at a complaint history. So for example, with Oakwood Village, a surveyor at the very end of 2024 addressed 2 complaints that had been raised at the facility, and as a result of the survey, 0 violations were raised and both complaints were unsubstantiated. Well, that's good to know, because you might have heard a bunch of hullabaloo about problems at a facility, and it's these things are updated not as frequently as you would like, but you can start looking for trends and go back through the history, see if there's been a management change, see if a facility that was recently nonprofit had been bought by a for-profit entity, and maybe there hadn't been problems for years, and now you're seeing a cluster of complaints in the current year. You have to ask what's going on. Has there been a management transition? And there have been a lot of management transitions because private equity is buying up a lot of these places, and there's no assurance that a place that was really great for 20 years is going to be great next year. This concerns me a lot, this private equity model and takeover of both hospitals and senior living facilities. Okay. So just to let you know, you have that recourse. You as an individual can go in and get that information. You do not have to wait on the administration to hand you a report. You can go do it yourself. And I highly recommend you do, so that you can go back as far as time as the records show. Okay, so in the state of Wisconsin, going back to the adult family homes, there's 2,300 of them in the state, 2,344, 174 in Madison alone. So I say, this is my next area of inquiry. I just, again, to show you another example, if you saw this house on the street, the only clue that it might be caring for people is that there's a paved area out in front and a couple of chairs shown in the front yard. But heck, you know, a lot of us have chairs in the front yard too. There's nothing to indicate that this is a care facility. This one happens to be over here in Monona, in the middle of a residential neighborhood. And I just want to put in a plug for the Ombudsman program here in Dane County. It's very active. There's a lot of volunteers. I am one. I have been one since 2011. And it's a long-standing program that's been around since the Nixon administration, where it was established. Obviously, its quality can vary in some counties versus others, but it does require a certain amount of training. I'd say a little bit less than it used to back in 2011, probably because there's just not as many people on payroll at the various departments of aging. But the benefit of this program is it does let the ombudsman go into a facility. We do not have to coordinate with the administration. Our job is to be a separate set of eyes and ears. We support the Department of Aging, but mainly we support the residents, including those resident rights to have a degree of safety, supervision, hot meals, nutritious meals, peaceful enjoyment of their home. It is their home. Rights to autonomy, right to see the visitors they want to see. Imagine if you were placed in a home and somebody didn't like the look of your son, okay? Got a lot of tattoos and a nose piercing, okay? If you're encountering someone at the front desk that's not letting your son into the place, that's a problem. And you are not to be denied that right to have visitors visit you that you want to come visit. These are the types of things that an ombudsman can help get these problems resolved more quickly, and particularly help people who don't have family or friends visiting them find their voice. Our job is to help residents speak for themselves and work up the stamina and sometimes the courage to deal with a problem. And then if they feel unable to resolve the problem on their own, with their permission and with their permission only, back to that autonomy thing, with their permission only, we can act on their behalf to help them resolve some of these problems. And the good thing about being an ombudsman, and I highly recommend it for anyone who feels a calling to this type of thing, is that you do have paid people in the Department of Aging who are your supervisors. You will never be placed into a situation where you can't rely on their better judgment and seasoned experience to help you with a problem. But it does help you open up your eyes to the world of assisted living and nursing homes. So it's a great experience, one I highly recommend. And if you yourself are in assisted living or nursing home and you haven't seen an ombudsman, you can call the regional ombudsman if your facility has not had a person assigned to it, or if the volunteer isn't showing up. So it's a resource for you when you have problems, and you feel you're just not getting anywhere with the administration. This is a resource for you to work through those problems. Okay, so now we move on to nursing homes. And this is where I'm sure many of you have used Medicare's search tools for providers and whatnot. I may not be showing you anything new here, but I want you to, your thinking process should be shifting over to looking at staffing levels and Medicare care grades, hopefully high care grades. We're lucky in Dane County, as well as down in Stoughton, we have hospitals with grades 4 and 5 that we can choose from. One of the things I would say look for is see if you see a history of high infection or flu rates, because it's important that these facilities have good disease and infection control ongoing. So that's a really kind of key leading indicator if a facility is having some problems. Do not be misled by moldings and wallpaper and baseboards and fancy tile on the floor. It is, you just see beautiful facilities that have ambivalent care pest, and you will see facilities with worn out linoleum, worn carpet, walls that have a lot of dings in them, and chair rail on the side that's been bumped into 1,000 times by wheelchairs, and you may find very loving and great care there. You really have to sort of table the way you might feel if you're going to visit hotels, for example. The appearances can vary greatly. The main thing is smell. Smell and see if it smells clean. Look at the floors. Look how often, you know, they're vacuumed or the tables wiped down in the eating areas. If you're visiting people, take a look underneath their beds. See if they're being cleaned out. Look up at the ceiling. Look at the air vents. See if they're covered with dust and debris, or if it looks like generally a neat and tidy place. Use your eyes and your nose a lot when you go and visit these facilities. So finding care providers, Medicare has a care compare tool. So you can pick nursing homes, including rehab services, and drill down. And back at the beginning of 2025, for example, here was a nursing home that came up with a warning sign behind it, where they had actually pulled down the rating completely because there were some severe quality problems going on that were in the middle of evaluation and hopefully resolution. But that would be a warning sign to you that maybe a facility that was great 2 years ago has been bought, I'm not saying in this case, but has been bought by an equity firm, or is going through a transition, or lost a physician's group, has been in the middle of a labor strike or a labor deficiency, and a problem that wasn't there a couple years ago could have popped up. So this is Medicare's map. So you can see there's quite a range of scores. And 3 stars, you know, I know when we go and look for a restaurant, 3 stars is probably not very good, but 3 stars means average, meaning that its performance scores fall within the range of normal. So it's when they get to lower values that you may want to look a little more. So I drilled down into Capitol Lakes. Again, this is from early 2025. And I found that their last inspection as of February 25 was in November of 2024. And there was 1 infection control deficiency and 5 quality of life deficiencies, 2 nutrition deficiencies, but certainly the biggies, the freedom from abuse, neglect, the residents' rights deficiencies. In other words, the residents were being heard. So I was like, okay, so what are these deficiencies? So Capitol Lakes seemed to have a really good staffing profile, good quality measures, but still Medicare as a nursing home rated it average. Here's where the interesting part gets, and it's very hidden. So you'll see all this stuff at the top of the list. You have to scroll to the very, very, very bottom. It's almost as if they don't want you to see it. Okay. And there's something called View All Health Inspection, Infection Control, Complaint, and Facility-Related Issues. I mean, it is way down at the bottom of the page, and I will tell you, in all honesty, I did not check that again prior to doing this class today, so I hope it's still there. I will go look, but it has been there for a very long time, so hopefully they didn't move it. So I drilled down in what were the Capitol Lakes deficiencies that were noted. And look at that. I mean, to me, this is a lovely thing for you. You can actually see what the complaint was. Okay, there was a pressure ulcer complaint. There was a complaint about a resident achieving sufficient range of motion while they were there. I have found that as an ombudsman, this is often related to people feel they're not getting their occupational therapy or physical therapy in a timely fashion. There's an awful lot of turnover in that and access to that inside facilities. This is a very frequent complaint, no matter where you go, this type of complaint. Somebody getting appropriate foot care, somebody having their treatment plan followed, and somebody getting access to dialysis services. So none of this is to be taken lightly, but it can be seen that the quality of life deficiencies affected few residents and were rated level 2, minimal level of harm for the resident. So on the whole, after looking at this, I'm like, I feel pretty good because, you know, these could have been huge deficiencies. These were rated level 2 under quality of life. But this is a small sample of what you can read online. And I'll tell you, there are just some facilities, as I say, you cannot tell by looking at them. You just can't. You have to go here and drill down. And I'll tell you, even going through a facility multiple times, I have when I've been an ombudsman at a facility for a while, the experience I had going there one time, I may detect a theme after 2 to 3 times. But I can still be really surprised on another visit if something has changed. Because when something changes, it can have a real effect. Like a facility can have a long time activities team that encourages a social interaction. And if that activity director leaves and that position isn't filled and it's backfilled by someone else, or worse yet, if they don't replace those activities or try to share them and have assisted living pick up the activities management, a person's quality of life can go from really good to not good in the matter of a few months. Things can change pretty quickly. You kind of have to tell yourself that even when you do your best effort at picking a place, things can change. Now, here's a case of social media I think actually works. And there's not much that works well, but I think this has worked well in the numerous times I have used it, which is as Nextdoor is an aggregator of real-time community feedback. You may not have heard Nextdoor. What it does is you sign on to it, you share an email, that's it. It'll ask what neighborhood you live in so that you're talking about things with other people who presumably live close to you. Could you lie about your address? Absolutely. It's not doing any validation, but it gives you a chance to talk with people who live physically near you. And that's very helpful. So like this one person said, my sons are looking for a good memory care placement for dad. They're new in the area. They're not happy with the first place they visited. It said it was 5-star rated, but it didn't feel like it was. Do you have a nice place for memory care that you've shared? And so 152 people replied to this thread. And you know what? There's always going to be people with an axe to grind. There's always going to be people who have a mom who isn't going to be happy with any place you would ever put them. But when you start looking at this number of responses, you can begin to see some trends and some consensus. Now, I have posted threads like this regarding in-home care aides. I have posted threads like this saying, hey, if you were retired and, you know, needed to have fun, free things to do in the middle of the day, where would you go? I mean, sometimes hundreds of responses will come out for these types of things and give you some really good ideas or make you think about something you might have not thought to ask about. So I think you don't have to use your name. You can use your first name and an initial. Again, there's no proving here who you are, but they are very community centric, and I have found this to probably be the only helpful social media that I have used where I feel I can begin to get some real intelligence from the data that I get. Okay, big warning for you about a place for mom. Avoid it. I am just very anti a place for mom. Okay, they don't do anything to evaluate whether or not the senior living properties actually have had any serious violations affecting resident care. The Washington Post did a big article on this in 2024. Their job is to make commissions. May it lower your labor effort? Sure, it may save you some time. Just remember, they are not like a fiduciary. They are not doing anything in your interest. Okay, they are doing it for their interest. They are hoping that you will get a place through them and they will get paid a fee. This is not a fiduciary. It is everything but a fiduciary. Okay, and it's not going to do anything like what you and I just talked about through these tools. Absolutely nothing. You'd be better to use the tools and go to next door and then go pound feet or get a friend if you're not able to, and go take several tours, quite a few tours, and then talk to people you know who might work in occupational therapy, physical therapy. If you know people in the healthcare sector, they can be a wonderful resource for you to find out what their general feelings are about a particular facility or system of doctors or hospitals. So touring memory care facilities, just kind of the first word of advice is don't take your loved one on the first visit. Okay. Go check the place out after doing the other things we've talked about. Either keep it on the list, take it off the list, get some questions answered. If you have concerns, if your spouse's condition is very specific and might have a certain progression that you can anticipate, talk about that progression, because your loved one may not be in the position of wanting to sit and listen to all of that, but worse yet, may find the whole conversation to be very agitating. So getting that out of the way and asking some of those more difficult questions. If you or a loved one can do that for someone else, or go with a friend. And then the second thing is take your loved one on a later visit and maybe bring someone else particularly that has the ability to reduce their anxiety, to shift or distract the conversation if it's becoming agitating and non-productive anymore. But that's kind of the sequence that's recommended for memory care visits and screening if you're able to do it. Just a reminder, something I know I don't think about enough, but when you're looking at a memory care facility, see if they support short-term rehab at the same time, because it's not uncommon that a person with neurodegenerative or cognitive problems may also have some motor control problems, be more likely to fall, be at much higher risk for hip fracture or bone break. So it's really good to know if they do break something that they can stay in the same facility they're already at, as opposed to having to move to a different short-term rehab facility. I don't think we think about that enough. I don't. And so now it's like I have to tell myself to ask these questions so that if you have a physical need on top of a mental health or cognitive problem, oftentimes they progress and come together. I just want to mention this one accredited organization, the Joint Commission. I don't know that they're keeping this up as much as they used to, but it used to be a way to look up organizations and get a better insight into their credentials and what they're really good at. This is a respected institution that's been around since 1951, the oldest and largest healthcare accreditation entity in the United States. So it's definitely worth going up to their site and looking in, particularly for hospital systems, more as opposed to nursing home facilities. So now we've gone from the lowest level of care to the highest level of care. I want to just close with the question of, can you stay in your home with some help? There's kind of a rule of thumb out there that if you need more than 6 hours of care per day, particularly if it's a level of care that is medical care. I'm not talking about non-medical care. I'm not talking about house cleaning services. I'm not talking about companion sitters. But if you need 6 to 8 hours of someone providing some degree of medical care for you, then an institutional setting may be a better value because it's going to get really expensive at over 8 hours. The other thing you're going to be faced with that people don't put enough emphasis on until they're stuck in it, which is you may get someone you really like, but then that person isn't available. Sometimes the next person coming in will be very, very different. Sometimes it's going to be difficult to synchronize schedules for 24-hour care or 16-hour care. It can be like managing a bunch of contractors. It can become extremely stressful. So institutional setting may be better for the caregiver as well as for the loved one needing the care. Going back to where you find more information on this, here I will say home health aid companies do a really good job of marketing themselves. Here's a case where if you just look for it, you'll get a zillion names. But again, I recommend you go back to the same website we talked about before, and this time open up home services and go down to home health. And you'll find a lot of information there. That's just an extract from the document. It'll give you a sense that as you do your search, you have done it rigorously, because I know these are such life-changing decisions that you want to have the personal satisfaction of feeling you did the best you could. So that's a good resource for this. But the bottom line is, don't do it alone. Use these resources. If you find them overwhelming, try to find 1 or 2 other people going through something similar. Talk to each other. Take some tours together. Split up the work. Use them as a sounding board. Visit these independent rating services, whether it's Medicare or the Joint Commission or Dane County. Call someone there on the phone when you're talking and it's not something they have to put in writing. You can literally hear through the inflection in people's voices sometimes if they feel a certain system is going to provide less effective care, particularly for palliative care or hospice services, than maybe another agency. You may have to read between the lines a little bit, but just talking to someone can be very helpful. But remember, go back to what I said in class 1. Use those weak connections in your life. Do not feel like you are a burden reaching out to others. Reach out. You may make a new friend in the process, and you certainly may learn something. So with that, I will end the briefing. And see if we want to talk any more about these other types of facilities. Any other questions? I know we went a little longer today. Charlene, go ahead.
When you were showing the ratings on a few of the facilities like Middleton Village and a few others, I just wanted to reiterate or to enforce that the patients that I worked with over the last 30 years agreed with those ratings being low. And my experience with the people who came in from those facilities in the bad shape or whatever, I would agree with those ratings being lower.
Well, that's, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I understand Medicare has a very objective, not subjective way of evaluating things. And sometimes you wonder if it's actually capturing the compassionate aspect of care. But it sounds like you've talked to people who've looked at it really holistically, everything from how well their wound healed or how well they got their rehab therapy, as well as how they personally just felt about being there. And
Absolutely. Many times.
Yeah. Great to know. Great to know. And it can really be shocking. To me, it's very surprising to see how one's perception can differ from what you see right in front of your eyes. And I've also seen a lot of places have a lot of very minor offenses that would not bother me at all. In other words, you might see 12 offenses, all of them related to being a couple of months late for training. Now, you have to ask yourself, what's going on there? And you should ask, instead of wondering, ask the facility. Say, I have seen, are you going through a lot of staff turnover? Because that's probably what's going on, as opposed to negligence and meeting the dates. So you have to drill down into this and use that to engage the facility. Part of me wonders if asking too many questions would be viewed as a hostile action by the facility. But I mean, I think they're used to getting these questions. You're plunking down a lot of money, so ask the questions. Anyone else? All right. Well, remember, email me, call me, text me, or whatnot if you're going to be there. If you have not already done so for the Art on the Square. Barb, go ahead.
One quick one. How long do you keep these slideshows available?
I own the server, so it'll be there forever.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it'll be there forever. I mean, Plato's free to pick them up. I mean, they're open. You can view them. They can put them on the Plato server, whether they have or not. I haven't even looked, but yeah, it's my server, my Google channel. So I own it. I keep a live family videos there. I use the cloud for a lot of things. It's not going anywhere.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Have a great evening then. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you. See you soon.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks a lot.
All righty. Bye-bye.